Hi everyone, I'm Charlie Oliver. I'm the coordinating ambassador for London, the South East for One Young World. I'm here with Jonathan Russell, who's the head of policy for the Quilliam Foundation, which I believe is the world's first counter-radicalization think tank. As I said, Jonathan's head of policy and is also doing a lot of work with One Young World. Given the kind of times we find ourselves in with the Nice attacks, the Orlando attacks, and to be honest, the kind of environment that we find ourselves in post-Brexit in the UK, we thought it was a really good idea to get a subject matter expert along to actually share some of the realities with us, because there's a lot of stuff out there in the moment you can find online, which it's probably fair to say where there's room for misinterpretation going on. So, and one of the things, Jonathan, that I've seen a lot recently, like particularly 48, 72 hours in the press, and particularly from our politicians, is that we're at war. Now, would you say that we're at war?
I wouldn't say that we're at war. The Pope recently said that we're about to face World War III. George Bush, after 9/11, claimed that this was a war on terror. I think both of them are wrong. I think rather what we face is a global jihadist insurgency. And I'll tell you why. If we see this as a conventional war, we'll fight it as a war. We'll have a military-heavy response, and we'll declare a state of emergency, as they've done in France recently. They'll clamp down on freedoms, and they'll start to polarize their communities and to alienate certain populations. Now, if we see this as an insurgency, and the response to a global jihadist insurgency should be counter-insurgency, then the way we're going to respond is with tactics that'll win hearts and minds, ones that will engage communities, and more broadly speaking, a full spectrum approach to tackle extremism of all kinds and really get down to tackling the causes of radicalization rather than simply the symptoms.
So we're saying maybe more about hearts and minds and sort of long-term sustainable solutions, and less about more rifles and more body armor.
That's right. This is the battle of ideas, not the battle of bullets. So what I'd like to see is really to get down to the difficult questions about identity and the difficult questions about grievances, the two things that are so exploited by jihadists all around the world with their extremist Islamist narratives that manipulate people to get them to carry out violent actions that they otherwise wouldn't have otherwise supported.
Okay. And looking at the Nice and Orlando attacks, the man that perpetrated the Orlando attack, I believe, was 29. The guy in Nice was 31. So they're both millennials. They both had ex-wives. And they seem to be lone wolves. Like, from the press coverage I've read, and I've tried to check loads of different sources, there hasn't been a direct affiliation identified between those two men and a terrorist network. My next question is, do you think it's possible for a lone wolf to be radicalized in a weekend like that, or are these guys perhaps doing it for some other reasons with some kind of far-fetched claim of affiliation?
Well, the quickest we've ever seen it happen, really start to finish, is about 6 weeks. So I wouldn't have thought that it would have taken a weekend. But what I would say is that because the nature of jihadism these days is decentralized, it's one in response to the security response is a more communications-driven strategy rather than a command and control strategy. Groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS are putting out an awful lot of propaganda. They know that they can get into people's bedrooms in Bradford or in the banlieue of Paris or in Molenbeek, and they know that they can win their hearts and minds, and they can compel them to take actions. Now, Bob Geldof at the last One Young World Summit had it right when he said our generation have blood on our hands. What he meant by that is what we're seeing now is a crisis within our generation. It's a generational struggle. It's millennials carrying out these attacks. And the problem, as I see it, is that Daesh over in Raqqa have got a much better strategy for engaging millennials than Western politicians do. And what we need to do in the counter-extremism world is find a way of engaging young people as effectively as extremists currently do.
And one other question I wanted to ask you, because you've tweeted about this a lot recently, is could you expand on the difference between Islam and Islamism?
So Islam is a faith practiced by 1.6 billion Muslims around the world. Islamism is a political ideology that exploits that faith and decides to impose it, sometimes by force, over a section of the public. Islam is a whole spectrum ranging from the spiritual through to the quietist, and on that spectrum is political Islam. That's what I call Islamist extremism. Within Islamist extremism, there too is a spectrum of strategies and tactics. And at the sharp end of that spectrum is Salafi jihadism. And Salafi jihadism is the desire to impose Islam over the rest of society, but by force. And in the case of Daesh, using terrorism as a tactic. And so there's a clear distinction between Islam and Islamist extremism. Unfortunately, a lot of commentators, a lot of politicians don't see that distinction. And what they do in their response to it is to alienate an awfully big proportion of the population that have nothing to do with terrorism, but who terrorists act in the name of. And that, for me, is a real problem, because our response to it ends up feeding the very nature and the very causes of the problem if we don't get it right. And that's why I say to Donald Trump, to Newt Gingrich, to others around the world who get this wrong, find a natural resting place for Muslims to counter extremism.
Absolutely. So we're filming this for One Young World. Jonathan does a lot of work with One Young World, particularly the Kofi Annan Foundation. I think it's really important we share some sort of trusted sources that you'd recommend for people to go and learn more about this topic. Could you tell us a bit more about those sources and also the work you're doing with the Kofi Annan Foundation?
Sure. So I'm working with One Young World and the Kofi Annan Foundation to launch a project called Extremely Together, and it answers the very problem that we've just been talking about: the way in which millennials are somehow more attracted to groups like Daesh than they are to counter-extremism or to the establishment or to mainstream interpretations of Islam. So what we're doing, there's 10 amazing young leaders who will be at the One Young World Summit in Ottawa, who are taking real leadership for counter-extremism now. They've been inspired by Majid Nawaz, my boss at Quilliam, by Kofi Annan, who have pushed them in the right direction. And they're now taking a step forward to launch a campaign in Ottawa, and then to produce a toolkit that will be available in February that is designed precisely to empower, to engage and inspire young people all around the world to tackle extremism wherever they find it, to make sure that we're getting this right, and to make sure that millennials have got an answer to the problems that the millennials are causing.
And one of the things we talked about before we started filming, which I think is a great point, is that this is really our problem. It's the millennial generation's problem. And you said, I think, this 1.8 billion young people are millennials in the world, and that's greater than the size of the Muslim population. So, we really need to rally together. Would you agree?
That's right, absolutely. Various of the Sustainable Development Goals are about engaging young people to bring about peace and security and strong institutions. And to do that, we've got to take a leadership as our generation, and we've got to have those difficult conversations about identity, about grievance, and about how we engage our generation to make the world a better place. So, yes, 1.8 billion is the figure, not 1.6. Let's engage young people. Let's not demonize Muslims.
Absolutely. So, thank you very much for watching. Jonathan Russell, I'm Charlie Oliver. For Jamal behind the camera, thanks again. Take care.